Welcome to Stress-Free IEP. You do not need to do it all alone. With your host, Francis Shefter, Principal of Shefter Law. You can get more details and catch prior episodes at www.shefterlaw.com. The Stress-Free IEP video podcast is also posted on YouTube and LinkedIn, and you can listen to episodes through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more. Now, here's the host of Stress-Free IEP, Francis Shefter.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Today's guest is Meagan Gillcrist, and Meagan has 12 years of experience as a special educator, but now serves as the executive director and founder of Align Ed. So Meagan, tell us a little bit about your background, how Align Ed, what is it? How did it come about?
Awesome. Well, thanks for having me. I entered the world of special education as a young person. So I feel like I'm kind of one of those unicorn people that got their undergrad and their master's in special ed, and went in and taught high school special ed for over a decade. I first started working with students with emotional disabilities, and then transitioned from that space to move out here to Colorado from Virginia and started overseeing special education programming at the secondary level. And really what I found within that one, I just absolutely love teaching. And I also love leading and really creating systems that really were supportive of students and teachers. And so I ended up overtaking the department and actually working with brand new special ed teachers. So a lot of the teachers that were working for me were coming to this space without their certifications. And so I was in a lot of SPED meetings and overseeing a lot of, just the legal aspect of everything. And what I found was that the IEPs ended up being written really great, but oftentimes what would happen is they weren't implemented with fidelity, or we were getting a lot of referrals for special education that weren't actually needed. And so I just thought there has to be a better way. And then COVID happened. And so when COVID happened, what ended up happening is now I was sitting in all of these legal meetings, and everything that I was getting was at the last moment they needed me to come in and start doing something. And so I honestly, it just burnt me out where I was sitting there. I was trying to come in. I was trying to kind of reactively put all the pieces together, and it just wasn't possible. And so I had been working on and with multi-tiered systems of support for a while. And really what I found was that there was no intermediate space between special education and general education that serves students that had even just a basic minimum need. And so I transitioned into the world of supporting schools and developing those systems. So that middle ground for special education, not for special education prior to getting to special ed, because there was just so many kids that didn't really need it. And ended up working for an ag tech company. And while the technology was really wonderful and helpful, the one thing that I found was that it's a people thing. People need help. People need the systems and the implementation and support. And so that is where Aligned Ed came from, was really helping support those people-led systems and structures prior to bringing in more resources or more technology that we can't actually utilize if we haven't supported and figured out what people actually need. So kind of a long journey from SPED all the way to Aligned, but really just trying to create some of those basic things so that SPED can work too, because that was a lot of what I was seeing, is that it didn't work with fidelity because all these other pieces were missing.
Yeah, and I love that special ed teachers, I'm a former special ed teacher also, see a need and then we figure out a way to fix that need, right? To go in. But so what do you talk about with systems? So what systems for gen ed teachers, for special ed teachers, what does that look like? How are you doing that to make change happen?
That's so funny because that's one of my pain points is that we often look at systems as like an extra thing. So we're like, oh, that new initiative, now we have to do all the systems. But really, systems are for everyone. And they're really intended to take decisions off of our plate that are having to be made every day. So kind of how I view where systems fit in is that we have the outcomes that we really want for students. And then we often say, okay, we as adults are going to do this curriculum, or we're going to do or write this plan to support students in reaching that outcome. But then we forget that the adults need help in doing the practice. And so the systems themselves, depending on what practice you really want to support the adults in doing, is created to help identify some of those decisions and help the adults do the practice better by just making those decisions. And as I like to say, systems are really supportive of adult behavior change because there's all these little things that have to happen for the adults to do the thing. And that's where the systems come into play, is how you're creating those and structuring those to help the adults. So depending on what you're doing, it could help just gen ed, but it also could help just special ed or everyone, depending on that practice.
Got it. So like, it's basically, I mean, I think of systems as what I'm learning from my business coach, in law firms, of like, it's just a checklist step by step of doing this. So you don't have to think about, oh, wait, what do I need to do next? Oh, wait, what do I need to do next? It's like laid all out, like do this first, then this, then this, then this, correct?
Exactly.
Basically?
And everyone's doing them in different pockets and they're doing them differently. So if we have just a common place that we're doing something succinctly, it just makes it more transparent and it makes it a lot easier, and we can all work a lot smarter and not harder.
Yeah. Which, it's interesting because there's a lot of times I know at IEP meetings that we'll talk about certain, strategies to use or things like that. And it's always, you would think they're best practices, but they're not, because gen ed teachers are not taught special ed strategies at all. And I know that because my undergrad's in early childhood, and then I went back and did my master's in special ed. And I remember sitting in the special ed classes going, why didn't they teach us in gen ed? Like, this just seems like, come on, take a break every now and then. You think that might be a good idea? When you transition, let's get up and do head, shoulders, knees, and toes before we transition to get us together, And so I'm assuming like those are some of the things you put in place, that if gen ed teachers are doing this, there might not be as much of a need for special ed because it's naturally just doing what all the kids need.
Absolutely. And one of the things that you're bringing up is that special educators become accommodators. So the job becomes doing and providing the accommodations, when in actuality, that is a generalist job, but they're never taught how to do it. And so often our time gets taken away from providing specifically design instruction because we're accommodating and doing a lot of those basic things.
Yeah.
So
I see that a
really
lot.
the time. Yeah, I see it a lot too.
Yeah, that like the modifying the curriculum or highlighting the things or doing all that little stuff, which, I mean, to me, the teachers don't have time to do it either. Like, that's where we need to have aides come in, and we need aides that are trained on how to do this stuff and have that additional support. That's one of the things I find all of the time, is that the teachers are expected to do so much and the special educators are expected to do so much that it's not realistic. Because you have a class of 25 kids and you have like 10 of them on an IEP. Like, come on, like, who's going to be able to modify everything and do everything the way it's supposed to be done?
I think it's also overcomplicated. Do you see my face? Okay.
Okay.
I think that sometimes we overcomplicate things too. I did a whole systems overhaul of our accommodation system at a high school that I oversaw, and it was actually pretty shocking to me what came out of that review. And the biggest things that came out of it were that we put a lot of best teaching practices as accommodations. And so when the teachers actually get the list of accommodations, a lot of times they were getting like 50. So if you have 10 kids and they have 50 accommodations, where do you even start with that? When there are just some, like you were talking about, some just entry level things that we can do. And so really making sure we're elevating the highest level accommodations and providing support on how to do them. But I also think that the other piece of that is we leave out kids.
Yeah.
It's particularly in secondary. They are incredible advocates. When we did a whole training with kids where we talked about, like, this is disability awareness. These are accommodations. These are your accommodations. What do you think about that? And we talked about how do you advocate, like in the middle of a test when you're not getting read aloud. And I said, it's a lot easier if you ask the teacher for the read aloud when it's not there than having to take the test again. And it was amazing to me from that conversation on. They would walk into their teacher and they'd be like, excuse me, I need this, this, and this. And so when that students had those skills to be able to ask and understand why they needed certain things, it really transformed how teachers were able to do them too, and took some of that lift off of them as well.
And that makes sense for our kids that can advocate for themselves. Like
Absolutely.
that, you know, because we want to teach the independence and things like that. But, you know, some of our kids, unfortunately, can't always verbally advocate. Yep. But that's where I know one of the things I'm working on now that I'm going to hopefully have a draft soon of, like, an intro letter from parents to send to their to the teachers of like, this is who my kid is. Because reality, you know, teachers have 25 kids, 10 on IEPs. Each IEP is 35 pages long. Really, they're going to read that, digest that, and actually be able to implement that for every single child. Yes, legally that's supposed to happen, but realistically now, you were in the classroom, I was in the classroom. Even in our special ed classrooms that we only have 10 kids, it's still difficult to do. And so, like, one of the things I always recommend to parents is to write a letter at the beginning of the year to the teacher of, like, hey, this is my kid. This is what you need to know. These are the strategies that work the best, and kind of nutshell it in so that the teacher's like, oh, okay. Because that does a couple of things. A, that tells the teacher that you're involved as a parent and that you're there to help support. And B, it gives the teacher the general of what they need to know about your child, which is beneficial to everyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. So I'm assuming, like, I'm just thinking along the lines of, like, a system of how to implement IEPs, like, in that sense, you know, is that like here's a system. When you get an IEP, this is what you need to do. Are those things that you put in place for the teachers?
Yeah. So one of the things that we did as a universal accommodation support for all teachers is we did a training every year and taught the teachers how to create accommodations matrices. So not only, like, getting the information about the student and really understanding it, but how do you actually systematically create something when you do have 10 kids in a class to really understand who's getting what, and how can you create small structures and supports that are in just your daily planning to make those things more succinct, so that every time you get a test that needs to be read aloud, or every time you need to do warm calling or something like that, it's not the first time every time. And so really understanding where there are things where if I have 5 kids that need that, then I can proactively plan a structure for that, versus every time I'm just trying to cherry pick and get to every single child. And so that's part of the system structure, is doing it that way. The other piece is particularly for testing accommodations and figuring out room structures and how kids are getting testing, is doing that at a school system level. So teachers shouldn't have to be figuring out where they're sending the student to get read aloud or to get the teacher, get support for a student. Like, that's not their responsibility. And so if there are ways that we can be more proactive in that by really understanding student needs holistically, and from kind of a larger structure.
Yeah. So you come in, you work for the schools, technically. It's the schools that hire you to come in and help?
Yes. So schools will hire me. I also work with individual teachers that are really kind of I work with schools for special education, and I also try to create those proactive systems and supports prior to special education needing to come to the table, because there's a lot of things that schools can be doing that not only help teachers, but they help kids too. And I do think that parents just really want help for their kids. And oftentimes when these middle ground supports aren't in place, they don't know what else to do besides ask for the most restrictive thing, which is special ed. And oftentimes I wonder if that is always appropriate at every single point in time, if we're being and identifying students faster and providing more supports proactively.
Yeah.
So
that makes sense.
I think it's,
and yeah, I was just gonna say it's that middle, because I know there's always that pendulum of like too many kids are being identified, not enough kids are being identified, and it goes back and forth. But it's like finding that, do they truly need the IEP? I know a lot of times parents push for the IEPs because of the teeth it has, the power behind it to make sure there's that accountability. But if there's a system in place that you're doing it as a natural, the accountability kind of is there already and it's happening. And I would assume it also helps teachers to be able to collect data for when a kid really does need the special ed, because, hey, we're doing all of this and it's not working. Now we now see something that we need to do differently.
and legally you're supposed to do it that way. It doesn't happen that way. Like
Never.
truly, like legally it's supposed to happen that way. And I think a lot of times by the time a parent is coming to the table and saying, my kid really needs help, it's because it's gone on for a really long time. And if your child is in 6th or 7th grade and is not reading on grade level, I would be concerned too, you know, like, or even 4th grade or whatever grade that is. And so if there's a way that we can start identifying these things way earlier and sooner by screening students, then we're not waiting till it becomes this 5-6 year down the road process where kids are now really behind.
Yeah. And that's, the screeners and being decent screeners, because, well, so for my daughter, just to go on the personal side, her kindergarten teacher pulled me aside, pulled me in after, and I love her kindergarten teacher, and was saying like, she's behind. And I was like, oh, we haven't been reading his home as much. She's like, no, she's been getting extra help. She's behind. Something else is going on. And then she was showing me the test scores, and she was like, oh, but the screener part of the standardized test says that dyslexia is not, there's no indicators for dyslexia. I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And of course, 2 months later, I had her in to get a private evaluation because it's the summer. And so for me, I wanted to do a private evaluation. And of course, what did she get diagnosed with? Dyslexia and dysgraphia, because whatever screener there wasn't enough. And I'm assuming like putting a system in place of doing a general screening, it makes a difference. Because so I was lucky enough, I got it early. We caught it early. We're going to catch her up. We're going to get her the tutoring and everything she needs and move forward. Whereas I've had clients come in that their 6th grader just got diagnosed with dyslexia. And okay, legally, does the school have to implement an IEP and put things in place? Yes. Realistically, can a middle school teach a child how to read the way a dyslexic child needs to learn? No. And they're not going to learn the content. You know what I mean? Because now you're going to miss your content from middle school because you're learning how to read the basics. And so if we have a system in place earlier, catch it in kindergarten and put those services in place, you now have set your child up for success. Instead of now, what I usually, for that one client, I said, like, look, you can pay me. I can get a perfect IEP. But honestly, take your money, go hire a good tutor that's trained in either Orton, Gillingham, Wilson, whatever it is for dyslexia, and get your child the tutoring outside of, because that's what your child needs. And
I think you're bringing up a couple important pieces too. One is that a screener should never be utilized to make long-term decisions for a student.
Right.
Like you have to do more assessment and use diagnostic tools to figure that out. And we're not allowed to diagnose dyslexia. We can just say the student has characteristics based on this information. And I think the other element of it as well is that oftentimes when we don't do the screening, is it really the student all the time? Like sometimes it's the instruction. If 60 to 70% of your students aren't reading on grade level, we got to do something different. Like we can't go and provide individual instruction for every single child if it's a larger systematic issue. And I think oftentimes we don't have that hard conversation. We skip to it being a student problem. The student's not reading, the student's not doing this. Well, maybe it's that the instruction's not appropriate for the children that are at that school or in that classroom. And so I think that doing screening also allows us, and especially as families, to have those larger conversations, because I know we don't always want to look at it that way, but we have to, right? If we're going to be reflective in how we're teaching.
Yeah. And one of the things that make me crazy is that it's not only the instruction, but it's the teaching style as well. Like, we all have different learning styles. Teachers have different teaching styles. It makes me nuts when the schools don't look at those aspects and put the kids in the classes based on that. And that when we have a child and a teacher that clearly clash, that the excuse for not moving them is, well, they're going to have to learn how to adapt to adults that they don't work well with. Well, yeah, as an adult, but as a child, when you're learning the basics, put the kid in a classroom where they can learn. There's nothing wrong with the teacher. There's nothing wrong with the child. It's just not a good mix.
Yeah.
Right.
And sometimes too, right? Like, the student actually might be missing some social skills, or they might be working on some of those other pieces where regulating with this adult that they're working on their own regulating. And then you put me in a room where I'm constantly dysregulating it around this adult. It's not setting them up for success either. There are some people that are just better than others at supporting students with diverse needs. And I think we have to be cognizant of that, particularly how kids vibe with the teachers when they're learning some of these skills. I 100% agree.
Yeah, it's frustrating. That's something I wish they would do, because I know, like, in high school we did like those personality tests and all that other stuff, and I'm like, all right, why aren't we doing something like the elementary school level? Why aren't we matching the teachers? Because honestly, it would be better for everybody, all the kids and the teachers, if the teacher's teaching style is to a certain learning style and they're all matched together. I mean, think of how amazing that classroom would be, right?
Agreed.
Because, everybody's being successful.
And when you think about secondary, I always advocated for scheduling my students first. It's like, please let me schedule them first. Scheduling is a nightmare. And the first year I went into a school, they scheduled my students last. Every single one of their schedules was wrong. I had to spend 8 weeks fixing all their schedules, moving them around. They weren't on track to graduate. I mean, it was just a nightmare. And none of that had been communicated to the family. And so then I was having to communicate to the family. Now I look like the bad guy. So really, one of the big things that we put in place moving forward was, I am not leaving for summer break until you put my kids on the schedule first, so I can schedule them like you're talking about, based on who I know they're going to jive with and who is going to provide that instruction for them, because I'm not coming back in the fall and having to move these kids that already struggle with transitions and already struggle with new people into new classrooms because they were not put properly in the schedule. So I've definitely had that experience.
And it's frustrating because they wait until the beginning of the school year till teacher in-service week. And it's like, which I understand to a point from the administrative side of like, well, you don't know what teachers are coming back and aren't and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine. You can make tweaks later if you put them in where they should be, and then it's also like, listen to the teacher recommendations. Like, I've had cases where we know for a fact that the special ed teacher recommended one teacher and the child was put in a different classroom. Why? Like, that just doesn't make sense. Like, to me, it's like, why are we here? Why are we educators? You know what I mean? It's for the kids, so these kids can learn and be successful. And if we're not putting their needs first, what are we doing? Because we're not educating.
Well, and I think you're hitting on, when thinking about the system, and this is something that I see a lot of, and it comes up in every single school or training that I do, is that our teaming structures are not built around children and how children learn. They're built around content or certain pieces. And so things are so siloed that these conversations never happen. And so, like a student that is struggling in reading, well, if we're only ever meeting about reading and math, we're missing the key here. And having a conversation and saying, how are you instructing on that? What elements can I incorporate in my classroom that will support this student? Which then comes into play when we're scheduling, when we're assigning teachers, all these things. Everything is happening like SPED is scheduling, ELD is scheduling, this person's scheduling, and we never actually sit at the same table to do these things together and to have the collective conversation. And so instead, unfortunately, the one that struggles is the child.
Yeah. I did have one school that used to do that they would have grade level team meetings, like monthly, that they would talk about the kids and what's working and what's not working. And it was amazing because that's exactly what it is. Because, we on the outside see it of like, okay, my kid's behaving in English, my kid's not behaving in math. Why? Is it teaching styles? Is there a math issue? Is there a reading it? Like what is truly going on? And if we don't have that roundtable conversation with everybody, we're never going to figure that out. We're just going to pick in, now we're going to evaluate and look if there's an SLD when it might just be a teaching style issue, right?
Exactly. And, the reality is we as one individual are not the center of influence for every single child. Like I benefited so much from being able to speak to coaches and the mentor or whoever and say, hey, this is what's going on. Do you have any insight into this? Or like, no, but I got you. Like, Miss G, I'll go talk to them. We'll figure it out. And then it allowed us to have a better relationship inside the classroom because I'm here for you. I know that I'm not like your top person here, but I'm trying to help you out. And so the more that we can have those conversations, we can also help each other out in supporting students that might know the family or might know the student better.
Right. Yeah. What's been the biggest disconnect in school communities that you found?
I would say that one of the biggest disconnects is looking at systems as a separate initiative, like I was saying earlier. So when we look at it as a separate initiative, we actually are just creating these random systems that we hope are going to help solve a problem rather than actually figuring out where teachers are struggling. So for example, we look at feedback and we get a survey and then everyone doesn't like the survey. So they're like, well, we're not going to create that system. Whereas I've been in some schools where when they actually go in and ask the teachers and the families, like, what is it that if we were to develop something here to help create and align people, what would be supportive of you? And they listen to that and they actually create the system based on that pain point. It creates substantial change in that environment. And so I would say that's one of the big disconnects is just looking at things as all separate and like, we're going to create one here and we're going to create one here. And we don't actually create it for the people that need it. Yeah. So we're creating it from kind of an administrative lens. And I would say the other one is data, the misuse of data.
The lack of data, period.
Well, and it's interesting because when I go into places, I'm like, y'all have a lot of data, but how are you using it? Most of the time, there's no intention for how it's used. So it just gets put away in a corner. And then they're like, oh, well, we have that, but we don't know what we're supposed to do with that. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. So, yeah, the not having enough data, particularly when you're talking about progress monitoring, or having too much data when you're talking about screening and benchmarking and no one knowing what they're supposed to do with it.
Right. Knowing the next steps. And so, it's, we joke about it, or my daughter mentions it. My daughter says all the time that she wishes we could go back to the one schoolhouse. Like she went to visit Seneca Schoolhouse here in Montgomery County and like came back and like, oh my God, it's the best thing in the world. She wants to go every year, like every month she wants to go and like every time. And she's like, because it was cool because she was saying that everybody learned together and everybody was there helping each other. And there wasn't like, it just, she loved that idea of looking at the holistic. Like you're not, oh, you're in first grade, so you need to be doing this, and you're in second grade, you need to be doing this, and you're in fourth grade, you need to be doing this. It's like, okay, you're doing this well, so you're going to do this, and you're doing that well, you're going to do that, and then helping each other and all of that other stuff. But like my argument always with school systems now is that it's not a holistic approach. it's very compartmentalized, it's like, here's the special ed department, like you were saying before, special ed department, the first grade department, the reading department, and like none of this holistic, let's look at the child and the children and the learning and come up with the I don't want to say whole language. That was way back when I was a teacher, what we used. But like just the holistic approach of looking at everything and helping the kids learn how to adapt and live in this world. Because guess what? They're not going to be doing reading separate and math separate and science separate. It needs to be all intertwined together.
Oh, so I call it an integrated data protocol. That's what I call it. But it's like really thinking about it in that holistic way. It's just like you can't separate like a student, as I describe it to people, a student doesn't come into math and they're like, oh, by the way, I'm going to leave that like social emotional thing I'm working on in my intervention at the door because I need to focus on math. They're not doing that. But we look at everything from that perspective. And I have a little nephew, he's in second grade, and just to see like the amount of homework he has in each subject and like all of the things that they have to do to meet the content here and then here and then here, like, oh, that's just doing so much when really they're all kind of integrated together. There are ways that we can look at it like that, and it would be way better for the student and for families.
Yeah, homework is that's always the toughest one. That's always a hard one because with a lot of kids, it's like they have to do their homework and do their homework. And to me, they just were in school for 6.5 hours, like, plus bus rides. Like, really? I'm going to make them do more homework? Like, maybe? I'm really bad about that. And I always admit it. Like, my kids need to be outside playing with their friends and learning and doing that social interaction, not drill and skill on math again. Like, yes, okay, that's important. But like, to me, the academic's going to come. Like the social, they need that just as much in the developmental. It's also, they just remind me of snow days. Like since COVID, they now try to make snow days asynchronous, or they try to do online. I'm like, nope, my kid's out that day. It's a snow day. They're out, snowboarding or sleighing or snowball fight or whatever. But like,
as they should,
right?
Yeah. Like be kids. And also I worked in Title the majority of my career, Title I, and a lot of these structures that we're putting in place, like snow day from home, is so inequitable. I mean, when we talk about equity and inclusion and supporting kids, like it is just, it actually drives me crazy because I'm like, I had to go during COVID to kids' homes and teach their parents how to log into the computer because they didn't know how to get on the internet. So when we talk about things like that and how we're structuring it, one, like kids need to be kids. And two, not every kid goes home and has that parent sitting down and can help them with their homework or can help them log into the computer or do all these things. Or it's just hard for them and they just exhausted all their brain power when they were at school and they need to go home and just, like you said, be a kid, decompress, like be able to just do kid things. Yeah. So I agree with you.
Yeah, I taught in Title I schools also in the inner city. And I just, looking at the differences of everybody saying, oh, education's equal and all that other stuff. But I'm like, I think now, like my kids come home with, oh, here's your student supply list. And here's the list of all the things that you need. I never had that stuff, like I couldn't even expect my kids to have a backpack, let alone a pencil or a notebook, anything. We supplied all that stuff and it didn't go home because it didn't come back. And, just on how looking at that stuff and then going and looking at the basic needs of the child, like that's a whole nother thing of looking at these standardized tests. I'm sorry, you cannot compare the inner city kids with the upper middle class kids and what they have in experiences and then try and say that, oh, it's the teaching is the difference, right? Like I know they tried to do that in Florida for a little bit, but it's just, I don't know. There's so much, as good as our system is and as better as it was, school systems, it still has a long way to go. So I don't know. So what, like, for school community just starting out, like, if somebody's saying, oh, wow, like this sounds great. We don't know what we're doing. We're all lost. What should they do? Like, what are the best, pointers of where to start?
Yeah, I would say the first thing is that you're already doing the work. I think oftentimes because we give it a different acronym or we call it something different or we give it a different name, we forget that teachers are actually the OG system creators. They have been creating systems since day one because that's how they're going to get by. And I guarantee when you look at the research and the framework of it, when I go in and do systems reviews, there are teachers that are actually already following the research in their classrooms. The only thing we have to do is capture what they're doing. So the first thing I tell people is like, you got to know that people are doing this. And I just want to ease your mind that you're not creating something new. You're capturing what's already here and letting everyone else benefit from it. I would say the second thing alongside that is you have to resource. So many times we want to go and create systems and structures and all these things, and we don't even actually know what's in the cupboard. Like half this stuff is hiding in the cabinet. We spend so much money buying new things that we don't really need to. I did resourcing for our department when I first started at this school, and the amount of money that I found in cabinets was shocking to me. It was just shocking. And so it wasn't even about buying a new thing. It was about using what we have and training people on using it. And so really knowing what you already have at your fingertips, because when you think about implementation, you actually save so much time. You already have it. People already know how to use it. So you're not recreating it. Things like progress monitoring. Special ed is doing progress monitoring. Just do what they're doing.
Right.
Like
teach them how, right.
Different. Like just do, whatever they're doing, then have your interventionist do the same exact thing. So instead of thinking that you have to recreate everything, really resourcing really well and capturing these little pockets of excellence that are happening, start there. Is kind of my main way of getting going, because I think oftentimes we overcomplicate something. What I have actually found, which is really interesting, is that from my systems reviews, teachers within the 6 to 10 year range have them like they're most eager to share the systems that they've created, and they want to. And so if you have teachers within that that range of teaching, that's a great place to go and observe them and see what they've already created, because they've done a lot of that front end work.
Yeah. And, it's great that you say that, because the same thing, like my business coach says, is like, okay, you're creating systems for your law firm. Go and have all of your employees, when they're doing something, to write the system out, because it's there. Like we have it. Like you said, I'm sure the teachers have it. Teachers that have been teaching for, more than 4 or 5 years, they have a system in place. They don't realize it's a system, but they have a system in place. And it's like, okay, let's go back and do this and write it all down and then teach it to the new teachers. And so then the new teachers now have something to start with. And will every system work for every teacher the same? No, you tweak it to make it work, but at least you have a starting point of what works. Right.
Exactly.
And again, then you're also not stuffing something else down to teachers. Because I remember as a teacher, I was like, oh, great, now they're teaching us something else. Whereas if you say, hey, teacher, we're going to do systems, and everybody's going to go, oh, so what I want you to do is write down the systems you use. They're like, oh, wait, what? So we're not teaching them something new. They're writing down what they know, and then they're teaching each other.
Yes.
And so I know for me, when I was a teacher, that would have been amazing, because it would frustrate the heck out of me that somebody from central office that hasn't been in the classroom for 20 years is telling me what to do in my classroom, that doesn't have any touch with reality anymore.
And doesn't work in your community and know your kids.
Yeah.
One of the things that I do work when I do implementation coaching with schools is we do a teacher feedback session first. And we capture the systems that people are doing. We capture the pain points that they're having, and saying, like, at the end of the day, if you were to have one system that got all y'all on the same page, what would you choose? And every time the teachers identify it. Every time. The next step of that is you actually have to create the system for that. So like if you're tell them, yep, we're going to do that, we're going to prioritize that, and then they come back after summertime and you've done something completely different, you lost them. They're done. Right. Like they're not going to do it anymore. Yep. Nope. You actually have to follow through on what you told them you were going to do. And if you don't do that, then they're not going to want to do it. But teachers know what they need. We just have to listen and be responsive to them.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed. And I know you have a 5-course bundle coming out soon. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So one of the things that I found, so I really dig and kind of nerd out on implementation science. It's just like a thing that I'm into. And it's interesting because every single state has their version of it, but it's the same research. And I supported over 20 school districts in developing their MTSS framework. And what I found was that within that, districts in schools get stuck on the same things. And so they never actually move into implementing and creating these structures because they get stuck on a couple things. And so the Align First 5 is really intended to support kind of your voluntold MTSS coordinator, because there is one at every campus. There's that one person that they're like, yeah, guess what? Now you're in charge of it. And they're like, great. What do I do? And everyone's like, I don't know. It's kind of where it starts. And they don't know where to like have these conversations with teachers and capture it. And so the Align First 5 is really around the most essential place to start. Doing your resourcing, looking at your data. How are you going to get people at the table together? Who should be at the table together? So helping that person really navigate getting off the ground and getting started with the systems level work at a cost that is doable. Because unfortunately, a lot of places aren't prioritizing this. And I do believe it's what's leading teachers to extreme burnout. So the First 5 is an online course that guides them through those essential structures, but also gives them templates on doing it. So on November 7th, we have kind of a mini workshop introduction that's free for people to come attend and learn more about it.
And who's that geared towards?
It's geared towards school-based campuses, particularly the person on the campus, like either typically their dean roles, special education leader roles, vice principal roles that are overseeing systems work, systems development.
Got it. Okay, that sounds so awesome. So on the November 7th, I'm hoping we're going to have this published by November 7th, but at least now it's out there live and we'll put that out. And I know we'll have a link when we do the full publishing in the show notes for that. So I'm assuming, like, how should people get in touch with you? If they're like, ugh, my school's a mess, I need help. How should people get in touch with you?
Yep. So our domain is aligneducation.org. So www.aligneducation.org, and also just my name, .aligneducation.org is my email. And so the best way to get a hold of me is either through the website, which I'll give to you, or just by directly emailing me and reaching out and seeing what we can do. I have a few different things I offer. I really kind of my level that I work best in is really helping schools get off the ground. So get organized on how they're going to do this and start getting those structures in place, and then developing an implementation process for how you're going to implement systems work.
Awesome. Oh, one more thing I forgot to ask. Are you just local or are you nationwide? International?
I'm nationwide. So I worked all across the country doing this level of work. I do work with schools directly here in Colorado, but I do travel as well.
Awesome. That is so great to know. Thank you so much, Meagan, for coming on the show and sharing all of this. Yeah, this has been great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Stress-Free IEP with your host, Frances Shefter. Remember, you do not need to do it all alone. You can reach Frances through shefterlaw.com, where prior episodes are also posted. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, and sharing the show with others through YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and more.